Everyone told her that buying that strange cave house was a terrible idea, especially for a pregnant widow. But for just 300, Hannah Cooper was desperate for one thing: quiet, in a place where her grief couldn't find her. Yet her loyal German Shepherd Ranger kept pacing the stone walls as if something was breathing beneath them. And when she finally placed her hand on the rock, she felt it too, a heartbeat deep inside the mountain. What she discovered next didn't just explain why the previous owner vanished. It proved that some secrets don't stay buried, they wait. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Winter winds scraped across the highway, carving white veins through the endless snow between Spokane and the dark tree line toward Coeur d'Alene. Hannah Cooper gripped the wheel a little too tightly. She was 31 tall but slightly stooped, as if grief itself had bent her spine downward, with pale winter skin and brown hair tied into an absent-minded knot behind her neck. Her face used to have softness, that gentle glow of a young woman excited for motherhood. Now her cheekbones showed sharper. There were days that she forgot to eat. 6 months of mourning could do that to a person, and 6 months was not a long time in the calendar of grief. 6 months ago, her husband Mark had exploded into a headline, into a body bag, into a police investigation file, into silence. Mark had been a quiet man, a bearded analytical geophysicist who used to speak very little but always listened deeply. He had a strange poetic way of reading rocks, like people read books. Some nights after Mark died, Hannah would still hear his voice in her head, describing the breathing of stone. She would remember his slightly crooked smile beneath the trim beard, a smile you only saw when he finally solved some impossible geological puzzle. Now he was gone, and all she had left from him was this 7-month pregnant belly, heavy on her diaphragm, demanding more oxygen than winter air seemed willing to offer. In the back seat, the German Shepherd named Ranger sat upright like a soldier fully aware of duty. Ranger was 7 years old, large-framed with sable fur black along the back and fading to warm cinnamon along his sides, and he was the kind of dog that could stare through a trembling human soul. Ranger had originally belonged to Mark. Mark had trained him when Ranger was a puppy, trained him gently with patience, with slow hand signals, never yelling, never forcing. Ranger had absorbed that quiet discipline. Now the dog watched Hannah the way someone watches a ticking time bomb, with love. Ranger had seen her cry in the dark. He had pressed his snout into her shaking hands at 3 a.m. when she whispered apologies to the empty space beside her pillow. He knew her better now than any living human. Hannah exhaled. Her breath fogged the windshield despite the heat blasting. She checked her phone. The map still insisted she would reach the lake road in 9 minutes. That detail felt surreal. 9 minutes until she turned toward the house she bought for $300. $300 for a real deed for a real property. Most people laughed at that number. Hannah didn't laugh. Trauma makes people understand how priceless silence can be. She shifted her shoulders and felt the ache under her ribs. The baby kicked once, like a reminder that she was not only driving away from her old life, she was also driving toward the first day of someone else's life, their child, and she needed to be something resembling sane when that day came. She rehearsed one single sentence in her mind: "This is not running away. This is choosing a place where the pain cannot hunt me." The road narrowed as pine trees thickened and snowflakes seemed bigger here, as if the mountain carved flakes into heavier crystals. The car dipped slightly as the suspension adjusted to the rougher, older pavement. Hannah slowed. Her eyes tracked the trees, scanning for the narrow gravel turnoff. Then she saw it, a small wooden sign half buried in ice with chipped, white paint. Private access, no plow. That was it. She pulled in slowly, tires crunching through untouched snow. Ranger leaned toward the window, ears pricked like radar. He emitted a low rumble in his throat, not fear, more like the tension of a guard dog assessing unknown territory. Hannah's mind flashed briefly. What if this place was actually dangerous? But then again, she told herself every place was dangerous when the heart was already wounded. She had survived the worst danger, losing Mark. Everything else felt manageable. After 100 yards, the trees parted just enough to reveal it. The house. It wasn't really a house. It was half house, half geology. The structure looked carved right out of the cliffside that wrapped around the lake. The left side was a normal small cabin, old timber gray shingle roof sagging under snow, but the right half disappeared directly into black granite. It was like someone had driven lumber into the side of the mountain, and the mountain had swallowed half of it. Hannah turned off the engine. Silence dropped like a heavy curtain. She stepped out. The air was knife-cold sharp in her nostrils. Ranger jumped out and stood rigid beside her tail, low body tight, watching everything. Hannah opened her coat and placed a palm on her belly. She whispered, "We made it." But her voice didn't sound like relief. It sounded like fear. Because she didn't know if this was the right place, she only knew she was too tired to stay where she had been. The lake lay behind the house, dark and still. Snow on its frozen skin looked untouched, undisturbed. It felt like time here didn't move normally, like time was hiding under the surface waiting. Hannah swallowed. She took her keys. She walked toward the door. Ranger followed one silent step behind. This was the beginning. This house in the rock for $300. This remote winter exile. This attempt to stop the bleeding of memory. She lifted the key to the lock, and her hand trembled not from the cold. From a strange feeling that the mountain itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who she would become. Inside, the air felt wet, not like rain, but like stone sweat, the kind of mineral humidity that suggests the earth had been inhaling and exhaling behind the walls long before human hands tried to build a home into its ribs. Hannah closed the front door behind her, and the sudden stillness made her ears ring. Ranger trotted forward, sniffing slow, his tailbone held horizontally straight line in his search posture. She flipped a switch near the door, and a single low-watt bulb flickered, then surrendered to a steady dull glow. The room was bigger than she expected. One long timber beam cut through the ceiling, aged to the color of dried blood, warped at one end, as if the rock had pressed against it for decades. Every piece of furniture was under white sheets. She felt an odd guilt lifting the first one, like she was disturbing someone's paused life. Under that sheet lay a sturdy oak desk, the kind with small cubbies built into the back. Another sheet covered a drafting table. A third, a shelf of instruments. She peeled them all back, her breath fogging in the cold air, her belly heavy in front of her like a slow present reminder of the future. Ranger suddenly stopped and stared at the rock wall beyond the bookcase. Not barking, not whining, just staring as if he recognized something beyond her human perception. Her heart knocked against her ribs once. She whispered his name, but her voice was small in the stillness. When she finally found the old paperwork in the drawer, she froze. The name printed on the top of the most recent file was Dr. Joseph Gray. Mark had spoken that name once in the kitchen when Hannah still allowed herself lazy mornings and coffee in mugs instead of thermoses. Mark had said the man was brilliant, eccentric, the sort of scientist who refused university funding because truth doesn't need permission. Mark had respected him, but had also been a little afraid of him. And now here was this house, this strange half-stone home, and bearing Dr. Gray's signature on dusty folders. Hannah felt a strange tremor of anger under her sadness. Why had Mark never told her more? Why was everything she discovered about her own life lately coming in fragments like this? She dug deeper into the drawers. She found a sealed envelope. It was light. She opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a small metal cylinder, empty, and a hand-sketched map of the lake shore, thin lines and arrows pointing toward the south bend. Handwriting at the bottom, yes, site Bravo 42 mem. The numbers felt like they punched a bruise in her memory. Mark had scribbled numbers like that. Hannah had often teased him, saying his numbers meant nothing to her. Now without him, those numbers felt like a secret language she should have learned when she still had the chance. A noise outside, soft crunch of snow. Ranger turned and went to the window. There was someone out there. His tail rose. Hannah looked through the glass and saw a figure near the edge of the tree line, a woman. Hannah's pulse spiked. She grabbed her coat, but only cracked the door open. The woman didn't seem threatening, just frozen there in the snow, like she wasn't sure about approaching. She had short blonde hair under a knit beanie, and she was thin, too thin, the kind of thin that made cheekbones sharp and eyes too large for the face. She blinked as though she could barely see in the dim light. When Hannah called out, the woman startled and lifted her hand weakly. "My name is Sarah Foster." Her voice was cracked, nervous, the voice of someone who lived under constant alarm. "I used to clean here, years ago." Hannah studied her. Sarah looked maybe mid-30s, pale skin that had lost its warmth with faint shaking in her hands. There was trauma in her posture, like she expected any moment to be yelled at or accused. Someone had treated her like prey at some point in her life. Hannah softened her own shoulders. Sarah came closer only after Ranger sniffed her and allowed it. Sarah's eyes flickered toward every corner of the room, especially toward the stone wall Ranger had been fixated on. And then she said something that made the blood in Hannah's veins cool. "You shouldn't sleep in the back rooms," Sarah whispered. "Dr. Gray said those rooms get noisy." Hannah's stomach nodded. Noisy, noisy with what? Before Hannah could ask anything else, Sarah flinched like she had said too much and took a step back. She apologized in a small voice and said she had to go. Then she walked away, quickly vanishing between the trees, leaving more questions than answers. Hannah stood there breathing slowly. The baby kicked again, harder this time, like a warning or a plea. She closed the front door and leaned her forehead on the cool wood. The house was silent again, but now the silence felt inhabited, like the quiet was not empty, but listening. She went back to the rock wall. She pressed her palm to it, stone cold, dense, hard. But beneath that hardness, there was something subtle, like a faint throb just beyond nerve threshold. She held her hand longer. 30 seconds passed, then a gentle pulse. Not imagination. Something living beneath stone. Something waiting. And for the first time, Hannah wondered if she had made the worst possible decision coming here. But she could not take it back now. Not with her baby kicking inside her like a second heartbeat, and not with Ranger refusing to leave her side. She turned off the lamp. The room fell into shadow. Ranger lay at her feet, eyes still wide open, watching the same wall she had touched. This was only day one, and already the house was answering her presence. Hannah sat at the desk long after Sarah had disappeared into the tree line, and the mineral taste of fear refused to leave her tongue. She opened Mark's old field notebook, the one with the torn leather cover. She recognized his handwriting instantly, sharp angles, small letters, like he was always trying to write quietly. Mark had always tried to leave a small footprint in the world. As a geophysicist, he didn't believe humans owned the Earth. He believed humans lived inside it. Hannah read the last full paragraph he had written before he died. Her eyes stung. It described a 32-second interval pulse found inside duolith cavities. The writing dropped off mid-sentence after that. Her hand shook because she realized the thing clawing in her memory, this 32-second pulse. This wasn't random. This wasn't new. This was exactly what Mark had been chasing when he died. Ranger shifted his weight at her feet, looking up with ears perked carefully but not aggressively. Hannah stroked the top of his head, feeling his thick winter fur. His coat wasn't glossy like it had been a year ago, but it was still full enough to show the health and discipline Mark had given him. Ranger leaned his body weight against her shin. Dogs always know when the human mind goes too far into the dark. The pulse in the stone was subtle, but not subtle enough to deny. She timed it again. She pulled out her phone, opened the stopwatch, pressed her palm to the stone wall, and started counting. 32. Pulse. She exhaled and repeated it. 32. Pulse. She sat back in the chair. That number 32 was following her like a ghost that refused to die with the body it had belonged to. She couldn't stay inside, not with that beat pressuring her throat like a sound she couldn't unhear. She left her coat unbuttoned and stepped outside into the darkening afternoon. Snow was falling again. Ranger came immediately beside her flank, pressed close to her leg in that natural protective formation trained dogs do without thinking. The path behind the house led down a narrow stone trail toward a small incline of rock facing the lake. She needed wind against her face. She needed anything that wasn't the ceiling, falling down on her thoughts. While walking down the slope, she saw an old boathouse at the lake's edge. The boathouse was small, wooden paint peeled into brittle curling flakes. She might as well check it. She pushed the door open. Inside was a rowboat with a broken oar, a coil of rope stiff with frost, and a stack of wooden crates. Ranger sniffed them methodically. One crate had a metal tag bolted in core sample set B. It was stamped in capital letters, old, scratched, maybe 20 years old or more. Hannah opened the crate. Inside were cylindrical rock cores, pieces of the earth drilled out in uniform smooth sections, each one labeled in pen depth location date. One labeled Cala 32. Her heart jumped. 32 again. But there was also a paper tucked at the bottom, brittle like ancient rice paper. On it was a photograph, grainy, black and white. Two men stood in front of a cliff wall, smiling at the camera. One man she didn't recognize, tall, broad shoulders, clean-shaven but with tired eyes. The other she recognized instantly, even though he looked younger, Mark. Her Mark. His beard shorter, his hair less messy, his smile more honest. And behind them in the stone was a faint circular etch like a carved ring or a symbol. Hannah sat on the boat edge, the wood creaking under her. Ranger pressed close. She stared at Mark's face and the ache in her chest swelled enormous. 6 months wasn't enough time to make her ready for the fact that he had been here, that he had walked this shoreline, that he had touched these stones and had believed in something secret living inside them. Then Hannah heard the crunch of snow behind her. She turned sharply, heart jolting. A man stood 5 feet away, wearing a thick Carhartt jacket, wool gloves, and snow pants. He had a square jaw, stubble, and the kind of rough skin that told you he worked outside daily. His hair was salt and pepper, but short, military neat. His posture was aggressive, not threatening, but like someone who has spent years controlling every inch of his body. Ranger growled a warning and Hannah said quietly, "Easy." The man raised both palms slightly. His voice was calm but firm. "Name's Tom O'Rourke," he said. He looked about 48 or 50 with his stern expression softened by a strange flicker of regret in his eyes. "I'm with the local search and rescue on the Idaho side. I live down the ridge." He nodded toward the boathouse. "Nobody uses that place anymore, not since Gray disappeared." Hannah swallowed. Tom continued, "Look, it's not my business why you're here. But I'll say this, people around here don't mess with that rock house. They call it a bad luck pocket." Hannah tried to keep her voice steady. "Did you know Dr. Gray?" Tom exhaled through his nose, eyes shifting toward the lake. "We crossed paths. Once? Long time ago. He tried to warn me about something below the granite beds. Said the rock wasn't dead." Tom tapped his temple with one gloved finger. "I wrote him off as crazy. I was wrong." Ranger's growl faded to a cautious rumble. Tom looked at Hannah a little too long, noticing her belly, her fatigue, her shaking hands. His voice became softer. "Ma'am, just be careful what you listen to in that house." He turned before she could form another question and walked back into the blizzard air until his figure disappeared. And when he was gone, Hannah realized her legs were trembling. She touched her belly. The baby kicked once. Ranger sat beside her tail, tucked eyes forward, and the lake, quiet dark, held its breath again. Inside that silence, the stone pulse returned, but now it felt faster. The metal groaned like something had been asleep for a long time and was now being forced awake. Hannah's breath hitched as the stale, almost metallic cold that rolled out of the opening brushed her face and drilled into her lungs like winter air pulled from the bottom of a mine. She took one step forward, and Ranger immediately pressed his body in front of her, his tail stiff, his stance low, his head tilted up in that sharp, evaluating way working dogs do when instinct is louder than logic. He was not growling yet, but the shift in his posture said everything. He considered whatever was behind that doorway a threat. Hannah whispered, "I know," and placed her shaking hand gently along his back. Then she raised the flashlight and pointed its beam downward. A stone staircase dropped sharply into the dark, narrower than she imagined. The walls were not carved evenly. Parts looked hand-chiseled. Other parts looked like ancient natural fractures that someone simply built steps into. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before stepping down. The stone under her boots felt slightly warm. Not warm like life, but warm like a machine that had once been doing something enormous and still held a faint memory of the work in its bones. Halfway down, she noticed something etched along the right wall. She lifted her light. A symbol, a circular ring, almost identical to the symbol she had seen in the faded black and white photograph in the boathouse. She traced the shape with her fingers, and for a moment she could almost smell Mark's cologne again. Not literally, but in some strange psychic memory. She heard him whisper in her mind that patient whisper he always used when he was teaching her something new. Rocks remember more than people. Near the bottom of the stairs, the air shifted, not colder, denser. Ranger's claws tapped twice, then stopped. He refused to go any farther. He just stood there, every muscle locked. Hannah turned to him. "Please," she whispered, "I need you." But Ranger didn't move. His eyes, deep brown and glossy, were full of apology rather than fear. That scared Hannah more than any monster could have because Ranger was not a fearful dog. Ranger had been trained by Mark to track wounded animals, to guard a tent alone, to stay calm during gunfire simulations. If Ranger refused to step forward, that meant something beyond instinct, something deeper, something primal was telling him no. Hannah forced her feet to continue alone. The chamber opened suddenly. It was larger than she expected, larger than a basement should be for such a modest cabin. There were old laboratory tables along two walls covered in dust thick enough to look like moss. Coils of copper wire hung like dead snakes. And then she saw the centerpiece, a bizarre lattice of transparent, crystalline rods arranged into a half-sphere, each rod veined with faint streaks of blue-green mineral, like turquoise caught in ice. The bottom half of the structure was embedded straight into the granite floor, like it had grown from the bedrock. And next to it, an old journal half buried under fallen plaster. She crouched carefully, her belly forcing her to bend awkwardly. She brushed the dust off the cover. There were two initials embossed, G and then M. Her heart roared. Gray and Mark. That was when she heard a voice from behind her. "Don't touch that." Her heart leapt. She spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Ranger had come halfway down now, low and cautious, but another figure stood silhouetted in the stairwell, tall, wiry shoulders sharp like thin steel. His face gaunt with cheekbones defined beneath papery skin. He wore a thick wool coat that looked at least 20 years old, frayed at the cuffs with a black scarf wound around his neck haphazardly. His hair was silver-white, long to the shoulders unkempt. He could easily be in his mid-60s. His eyes were startlingly clear, though icy blue alert, in a way that did not match the frailty of his frame. That clarity alone gave him the aura of someone whose mind had not decayed even if his body had. His voice, despite his thinness, had resonance, a voice used to giving lectures or orders. He stepped closer, boots scraping the stone. "I am Dr. Samuel Ashcroft," he said. "I worked with Gray years ago. We knew this place was dangerous." Hannah could not speak at first. Bernard Ashcroft had held himself with the rigid posture of a man who had spent a lifetime judging other people's logic. He seemed like the type who had once been terrifyingly brilliant, excessively demanding, and probably lost his reputation not for lack of ability, but for lack of patience with stupidity. His voice was too calm for the fear she felt. He continued softly. "Gray thought this formation was a system, a living one. And Mark, your husband, he believed it too." Her knees almost buckled. She blinked at him. "You knew Mark?" Ashcroft's jaw clenched as if he regretted something. "I warned him to walk away, but he couldn't. He was stubborn. He wanted to prove that mountains evolve, not geologically, organically." Hannah clutched her stomach as the baby shifted. She rasped, "Why are you here now?" Ashcroft looked at the crystal lattice as if it were a sleeping predator. "Because I felt it waking." Hannah stared at the rods. She could swear they were faintly glowing now. Ashcroft's face tightened. "You need to get out of here," he said. "Every time a new heartbeat enters this room, the system adjusts." She stared at him, trembling. "Heartbeat?" He nodded once. "Yours, and the one inside you." Hannah stood there, not moving, stunned silent by Ashcroft's warning, while the crystalline lattice inside the chamber pulsed faintly like veins beneath translucent skin. There was a moment where she felt she could hear her own heartbeat inside her skull, and then she realized she was also hearing another rhythm beneath the granite, a rhythm that existed before she ever arrived here, a rhythm older than anyone who had ever touched this mountain. Her mind flashed through memory, Mark's hands over her belly the night before he flew on his last assignment. Mark's voice telling her that rock layers are like story chapters. The earth writes for itself. Mark's quiet belief that matter wasn't indifferent. That matter remembered what touched it. That belief in memory, mineral memory, was why Mark had been in that field project in the first place. It was also why he died. And now she was here 6 months pregnant, standing in the belly of a mountain that might actually be a living machine built from stone. Ashcroft was carefully descending the final steps toward the chamber, now cautious as though each step could activate something, his sharp blue eyes never closing. Hannah could see now what his body told her. He had been a confident man once, but now he was afraid of his own knowledge. Men like him are always punished by their own intelligence. They see too far, and they cannot unsee. He kept talking in his low, urgent rasp, telling her that the system beneath this mountain was parasitic. In a strange way, not parasitic to biology, but parasitic to emotion. He said that the thing, if he could call it a thing, responded to grief, trauma, emotional resonance, the same way the ocean responds to gravity from the moon, not metaphorically, but literally. This system consumed psychic frequencies the way a furnace consumes oxygen. And when Gray realized that human pain was food to this mountain's resonance core, she could see it in Ashcroft's face. Gray panicked. Because to study something that becomes stronger when humans are suffering is to stand in the very mouth of a hungry thing. Ashcroft's voice began trembling, as if he now believed he was inside the jaws again. Hannah's knees felt weak. Ranger pressed into her thigh tail. Low ears, flattened eyes locked on the crystal network like an infantry soldier watching artillery ready to fire. Ranger did not bark, he did not even growl, because true fear isn't noisy. True fear is the kind that silences even an animal. Hannah forced herself to ask the question that had been burning under her ribs since she saw her husband's initials in this place. Did Mark know what it was doing? She said it like a confession. Ashcroft nodded once, slow, exhausted. He knew before he died. She closed her eyes hard. Something in her chest broke and reformed at the same time. She had been punishing herself for half a year for not understanding what happened to Mark. She thought she had failed him by not knowing enough. Now she realized he never told her because he was trying to protect her from something that wanted to feed on grief. He didn't want her pain to become its fuel. She exhaled once and it sounded like a sob. Her hand reached toward the nearest cable that was connecting the crystal frame to the rusty generator in the corner. She flicked the emergency shutoff lever with the side of her wrist. Sparks spat like small metal insects. The faint blue light inside the crystals flickered like dying bioluminescent plankton in a black tide. She felt the vibration slow. The pulse dropped from a hungry 32-second cycle to something weaker, an anemic, faint residual tremor. Ashcroft stared wide-eyed. "You don't know what you're doing." Hannah snapped, her voice low, but cutting clean through the air. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I am a mother." Then she grabbed the main breaker panel with both hands and ripped the fuses out one by one. Metal screamed, and the entire chamber exhaled a low, guttural roar, almost like disappointment. Ranger took a sharp step back and whined ears down because the hum beneath them suddenly fell silent. Too silent. Hannah steadied her breath. She thought of her child. She thought of the future. She thought of her heart. And within that stillness, she realized this love is not measured by how long you grieve someone. Love is measured by what you protect in the world that remains after them. She turned to Ashcroft, who looked physically smaller now, like a man who had lost the dark purpose he had defined himself against. He staggered slightly and rested his hand on the wall as if his bones had suddenly become hollow. She said quietly, "I am not feeding that thing anymore. Not with my suffering. Not with my baby's future. I don't care what this mountain wants." Ashcroft stared at her, stunned. "You've shut down a system that is older than civilization." Hannah adjusted her coat, placed her palm over her belly, and stared at the still crystals with steady eyes. "Then civilization can go on without it." Ranger nuzzled her handtail, faintly wagging now, uncertain but hopeful. Hannah walked back up the stairs. Ashcroft slowly followed behind her, no longer a threat, just an old man who finally realized that sometimes the most radical scientific act is refusal. When they reached the top of the stone stairs, and Hannah closed the iron door to the lab, she felt something heavy lift off her. Outside, snow blew across the window like white feathers drifting across clean sky. For the first time since Mark died, she felt something shift inside her, not the pain disappearing, but the ownership of her pain returning to her hands. She was no longer feeding anything in the dark. She was choosing light, choosing the future, choosing this child inside her. And that was how Hannah Cooper became free again. In the end, Hannah's story reminds us of something miraculous and ancient, that even when darkness tries to feed on our pain, God can still turn sorrow into strength and transform broken hearts into new beginnings. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud, not supernatural storms or flashes of light. Sometimes the greatest miracle is simply this: a mother choosing life, choosing hope, choosing faith over fear. And maybe that is how God works most quietly, not in thunder, but in direction, not in magic, but in courage. If you are watching this right now, maybe your own mountain is heavy. Maybe your own heart has been hurt. Maybe you too are carrying something inside that needs light instead of darkness. Then this story is for you. May God bless you today. May He protect your home, protect your family, and protect your heart. Before you go, leave a comment below. Do you believe some places remember pain? Or do you believe God always remembers love stronger? I would love to read your thoughts. And please share this video with someone who may need hope tonight and click subscribe so you don't miss the next story that might speak to your heart at the exact moment you need it. God bless you. May His light guide your next step.